Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next chapter analysis for The Rise of Kyoshi. This one's going to be for chapter 2, which is called 9 Years Later. And that's exactly what they do here. They use chapter 2 to have the time skip to where most of the book takes place. So we go from 7-year-old Kyoshi to 16-year-old Kyoshi, and that is basically the rest of the book. Like, I'd say a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months pass over the course of the book. It's not super clear about it, but Kyoshi goes through a decent amount of training and stuff like that. So they sort of montage through kind of little bits and pieces of it, but I wouldn't say like anything more than just a handful of months or even a few weeks pass by over the course of this book. So this is our main time period for the book. And yeah, what we get here is actually a chapter that's fairly simple. It's just a little thing to just establish these are some of the characters here. Here's some of the things that you wouldn't quite expect the main time period of this book to sort of be. And the thing here is that you start off and it's like, here's Kyoshi on her way back to Jianzhu's mansion. So straight away, the idea that, okay, Jianzhu has built a mansion here, and this mansion is there to train the new avatar, Avatar Yun. And immediately you're like, wait, who's Yun? Why is he the avatar? Kyoshi's the avatar, but that's just us as the audience. We haven't seen the story and how it plays out. So obviously what's happened is that they haven't gone after Kyoshi and realized that, oh, actually she's the avatar. They didn't perform the test on her. But in the meantime, someone else had passed the test and has apparently been found out as the avatar. But Kyoshi is working for the mansion. And we find out that Kelsang, through his obviously friendship with Jianzhu, has got her this job at the mansion, and she is bringing this kind of the last jar of spicy kelp of the year back to the mansion. So it's a sort of important food item. She's bringing it back. We get the idea that she's just this kind of general sort of servant within the mansion, though we'll later learn that her role specifically is more of being the direct assistant to Avatar Yun, because he's a bit messy, and Kyoshi is known to be kind of quite organized, and she just helps to clean up some of his messes, both literally and kind of figuratively. So that gets across immediately that she actually is fairly close friends with Yun and some of the other characters at the mansion who are helping to train him, but that this is not the position we would have expected the book to start out in, that Kyoshi's not the avatar. She doesn't know she's the avatar, and no one else does at this point in time. So how do we get to that point? That's the question here. And this chapter is just about her bringing this jar back to the mansion, and I suppose what happens along the way, and how it sets up Kyoshi's position here. And it kind of shows us how far she needs to go to get to being the Kyoshi we all know. The one who doesn't take any prisoners, doesn't take any nonsense. That Kyoshi. How does she go from being this character here who's kind of meek, lacking in confidence in a way? And that's what we get here. She talks immediately about kind of neutral Jing, so the idea of kind of waiting and listening before striking. But Kyoshi's problem, you would almost say here, is that she waits and waits and waits, but never actually strikes. So in this specific situation, she's on the way home with the jar of kelp or whatever it is, and the other kids around her age basically start hassling her. One of the earthbenders sort of begins to levitate the jar, which is made of earth, and kind of takes it away from her. And Kyoshi's approach is basically, okay, I know they're sort of bullying me here and they're kind of jealous of me, but I should not react to what's going on here. I shouldn't do anything here. So she just kind of waits and waits. They're continuing to walk back to the mansion. And along the way, you kind of realize what the dynamic is here. Why they pick on her is that she went from being the orphan who no one cared about to suddenly she actually has a role in the Avatar Mansion, the kind of big new sort of center point of the town, and the other kids are sort of jealous of that. But Kyoshi sort of points out that if not for the kindness of Kelsang and Jianzhu, she'd just be out on the street. She wouldn't have anything, whereas at least the other kids, with their parents, always have, the field that their parents work in to sort of go into themselves, that those jobs are always inherited, and there was no real options for her, and she was given one, and it just happens that it's a very good and nice position with the mansion. So it's definitely an interesting situation as Kyoshi by the end of the chapter realizes that they do sort of pick on her primarily because they are jealous of her. But yeah, we get a couple of descriptions here. I'm just kind of looking at my notes here. The idea that, they mention goat dogs as being one of the animals that they have within the kind of Avatar mansion. It is Jianzhu's mansion. He specifically bought some land here and created this mansion himself. And that the villagers of Yokoya went from kind of being like, okay, cool, we'll accept the money to just give you some random land that we're not really using. But they've come to sort of be like, the mansion's a little bit of an eyesore in our otherwise very simple town, but, Kyoshi really appreciates it because it gave her kind of something to do. It's like very important to her because so many of her friends are there. It's at this point we also get the idea that we get confirmed here, Jianzhu is actually from the Ganjin tribe. So they mentioned that he's from the Ganjin tribe up north, establishing that the north is kind of the, I suppose, home place of the tribe, which is interesting. Some of the other kids note that they're kind of, they sort of look their noses down on Ganjin tribe members, saying that, like, I can't believe they sold land to a Ganjinese, which is pretty interesting. And I like that because I think a lot of other people would have been like, never ever reference anything from The Great Divide because it's a terrible episode, but I really like the approach, and it's something I've always said about The Great Divide, is that yes, it's not the greatest episode of Avatar, but there's actually a decent amount of world building in there. It mentions like Earth, Spirit, The Great Divide itself is a notable location, the canyon crawlers is a notable animal, and then yeah, you get introduced to the idea of there being Earth Kingdom tribes with the Ganjins and the Zhangs. So I really like the idea that a very important character in this book is from the Ganjin tribe. And like, they don't go into too much detail on it specifically. The Zhangs, I think, get a mention at some point later on in the book, but he is from the Ganjin tribe, it's up north, but that here he is, he's sort of a sage, he's a very high-ranking person within the Earth Kingdom, and so on. So very, very, very interesting, but yeah. Kyoshi's obviously being kind of bullied by the other kids, not really reacting, just hoping it all works out. They get to the kind of gates of the Avatar Mansion, and this is when Kyoshi is basically saved by Rangi. So this is a main character being introduced here. Rangi is a female firebender. She's kind of firebender sort of nobility. She's had like elite military training, so she's a skilled firebender. She's primarily here at the mansion because her mother is assisting in Yoon's training, but Rangi herself specifically is Yoon's bodyguard. So the idea is that you have a little bit of a setup for kind of the Yoon's team avatar. Yoon's team avatar is like, himself, Rangi, kind of Kyoshi in a way, and you sort of say, okay, I see what they're doing here. That's pretty interesting. But yeah, Rangi arrives, she kind of saves Kyoshi, she kind of gets everyone to sort of calm down, but in the middle of all of this, what happens is that the girl who is levitating the earth in the air just decides to drop it. That's their way that they'll get one over on the higher-ups at the mansion. So the jar is falling, and Rangi's like, Kyoshi, like, earthbend it to stop it from falling, catch it with your earthbending. And Kyoshi's like, I can't, you don't understand. Like, and in the narration from her perspective, it's like Rangi didn't realize like her little problem. So we get explained later on what that problem is. I won't spoil it right now, but it's relating to her earthbending in the fact that she can actually earthbend, but specifically it relates to, I suppose, specific situations and what type of earth in a way she can bend. So it's interesting here, this sort of an operation is not something at this point in time that Kyoshi can do. So instead of trying to catch the jar, she instead tries to save Rangi from the jar potentially dropping on her. So she dives and kind of tackles her to the ground to save her from this. Now, it ends up not really affecting anything because by the time she tackles her to the ground and then gets back up, they find out that there's nothing wrong with the jar because it's still levitating, and that's because Yoon has arrived. So they introduce Avatar Yoon here by basically, he levitates the jar, but at the same time levitates a bunch of kind of like small stones and pebbles on the ground to sort of spell out some sentences to Rangi and Kyoshi, and basically starts talking to them through these kind of sentences he's kind of making with floating rocks. And the Kyoshi mentions that this specifically is a sort of noted ability that he has. This is kind of why he is so impressive as a bender, is that she's never seen an earthbender able to bend so accurately at such distance. So we obviously know with earthbending the key is like connection to the element, but that there is a sense of earthbenders being able to just move rock that they're not directly touching, but there being a limitation to it. Yun, he has an amazing connection to earth that is not just facilitated by feet on the ground type stuff. So that's interesting. It gives you the idea of like, oh, so maybe he wasn't found out to be the Avatar in a specific way, and they just thought that like, here's an earthbender prodigy, he's like the right age, it must be him. So he arrives in, and what's interesting, like these three characters all around the same ages, so Kyoshi, Yun, Rangi, you immediately start to get the dynamic between them all of like, they're all friends, because you'll find out that Kyoshi is directly Yun's assistant, so they spend a decent amount of time together. Rangi and Kyoshi are close, despite kind of Rangi being a little bit harsh on Kyoshi, mainly because she wants Kyoshi to improve. Because that's what you get here at the end here. When the other people who are kind of bullying Kyoshi scatter off, Rangi begins to kind of, in a way, like berate Kyoshi almost, of like, why did you let them do that to you? You work at the mansion, you're higher up than them, you're an earthbender as well. Why didn't you, in a way, fight back? Why didn't you use your ability and just stand up for yourself? And Kyoshi notes about Rangi that, like, she is my friend. Like, it doesn't seem like it, but she is actually my friend. And the idea with Rangi is that she'll only be that intense with people, with people who are actually within her inner circle. So Rangi would usually just ignore someone if she didn't care about them. But the fact that she's kind of going on and on at Kyoshi about improving herself shows that there is actually a connection between the two. So that's pretty nice. Similarly, she notes that like, Yun, what are you doing up there, kind of showing off. And then in terms of romantic things, I think there is this slight hint, even this early on in the book, of Kyoshi's feelings for both Yun and also Rangi, because of course of the whole Kyoshi is bisexual thing. Because they note in the wording here that when Yun starts to spell out sentences with the rocks, Kyoshi giggles at it because he says like, hello, my two favorite ladies, or something like that. And like, Kyoshi giggles, Rangi's just kind of annoyed by it. And then when Kyoshi tackled Rangi to the ground, she was kind of embarrassed at having done that, and she's kind of like red in the face. And then right at the end, she kind of teases Rangi by saying, like, oh, I don't need to worry about my earthbending because I have like a strong hero like you to save me. So, just being a little like kind of teasing, a little flirty in a way with Rangi. Now, obviously, they do stuff much later on to kind of set up more about why these two relationships are actually, actually romantic. But there's even the hints right here, and it works that you get the subtle hints here, and then they go more in depth on why, yes, this is the correct interpretation in later chapters. But that's most of what I want to get across. I like the characterization of Kyoshi, of like Rangi basically pointing out of like, you are not, what Rangi says to Kyoshi is basically, you are not the Kyoshi that the audience knows. You need to be more like that character, but she hasn't gone through the development to get to that point. So you have a Kyoshi who doesn't engage in these fights, just waits and kind of almost waits for other people to do the work. Doesn't see herself as being the hero at all, even though she has earthbending, and kind of waits for other people, the Avatar Yun, Rangi, to save her. And I think that's very interesting to see how much she goes through, because it's a very different character at the start of this book to her at the end of this book, being much closer to the Kyoshi we actually know from the series and stuff like that. The legend that is Kyoshi. So, yeah, that's about all I really want to say here. That, like I said, it's a very quick chapter. It's just the initial introduction of Rangi and Yun. We learn much more about them as the book goes on, and then more or less it's meant to be a Kyoshi, this is who she is. At the start, setting that up chapter. We'll get into the details more later on, but I just like some of the details that we do get here. Just the little things like, Jianzhu being mentioned as being from the Ganjin tribe, and those type of things, noting that Yun's ability is actually quite unique because it shows that he's kind of a high-level earthbender, being able to bend so delicately from such a distance, and things like mentioning Jing, neutral Jing, as being the approach of an earthbender, and then later on in other chapters they'll note that positive Jing is the mentality of a firebender, that sort of thing, and like airbenders having negative Jing and so on. Again, just the detail, I really like it. It helps to just build the world out, that these are concepts that are consistently prevalent in the world, and so on. I think it really works. There's even some like details on some of the names of stances that characters use when they start to earthbend and so on. And yeah, just the beginning of the hints of like, here is kind of what appears to be Kyoshi's team. Like when all the reveals come out, once it's found out that Kyoshi's the Avatar, then, well, surely her team is then Yun as her earthbender guy, you know, Rangi as her firebender character, and then they'll introduce other characters along the way. Surely that's the way it will have to be. But there's so many twists and turns along the way in this story. So yeah, that's my thoughts on chapter 2 of The Rise of Kyoshi. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on it. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.